Hey guys, what's up? It's TubaSteve here, coming at you with episode 4 of Road to Robusto No Limit Edition. I actually have something a little bit special for you guys today, so I was just going to keep going with the sweat videos. Actually, I had prepared another video review, but sort of yesterday at last minute I got a bit of a message from, well, not directly from a member, but it was forwarded to me, and basically, I think that, I admitted to it a little bit in the last video, but I got a little lazy. I've been kind of busy, and the video review was not really, super well planned out. So I thought, in order to make up for that, I'd give you guys a really meaty episode here where what we're going to actually do is go through my Hold'em Manager through the hands that I've looked at so far, because one of the comments was also that I haven't really been keeping up with the theme of Road to Robusto and keeping up with my progress, so you guys will get to see that. But what we're going to do is go through those hands and look at my Hold'em Manager and just sort of take a look at what I am calling here the Terrible Trinity. If you want, you can call the episode Find the Spew. But anyway, what we're going to be looking at here, and I'll move ahead to the next slide, is what I'm also going to call, I mean, you don't have to call it this, but I have up here the 3 main micro foibles. For those of you who English isn't your first language, a foible would be typically a classic mistake that makes you look foolish, sort of. There was this kid in high school that I called the foibler. Not that I was the coolest kid in high school, but anyway, you get the idea. A gaffe, a mistake. I'll also, real quick, go ahead and apologize. I'm not a super PowerPoint expert, so I don't have fancy animations for you or anything like that, but I don't think it really detracts too much from what I'm going to be talking about. So anyway, what are the 3 main microstakes foibles that you're going to encounter? And these are basically the biggest, really the 3 biggest leaks that I try to tell all of my students about, at least within the first few lessons. And if I failed, I apologize greatly. If you're watching out there and you're like, damn it, TubaSteve. But anyway, you got it here now, so better late than never, right? Anyhow, so these are the 3 big ones. Value betting. Number 1 being value betting. All your money at microstakes comes from value betting, almost all of it, because people suck at folding, right? So value betting or lack thereof, really the lack thereof in the parentheses here for all of these is sort of the key. People don't value bet enough, and so we're going to be targeting that and looking at how we can go through our Hold'em Manager to see if maybe we found, if we had some hands where we did misvalue. Furthermore, folding post-flop, aka obeying the so-called beluga theorem. This is a big one that people, people tend to understand, I think, conceptually what the beluga theorem is, but then when they're at the table and, you get aces and you get check raise on the turn, it's really hard for beginning players to actually believe, I guess, that they're beat and let go of the hand, and so, confidence plays a large role in this sort of thing, too, and just being able to be sure that you're making the correct play, and going through your Hold'em Manager and looking through these filters is really, I think, one of the best ways to reinforce the fact that if you don't fold post-flop to late street raises, you're going to lose a lot of money. And then so the third topic would be having an exploitable 3-betting game, and I put our lack thereof there just because it seems to me almost like some guys don't have any sort of 3-betting game. It's not even that their 3-betting game is exploitable. Well, it is. It's just you can hardly even call it a 3-betting game because they're just 3-betting, super strong hands. And I want you guys to sort of think about why we might 3-bet a little bit. And furthermore, what I'm getting at here really, I guess, is that most people tend to call too many 3-bets, and then they do not 3-bet often enough themselves. So you end up, folding to only like 30% of 3-bets, and then only 3-betting other people 3% of the time or something like that. So you're putting in money against guys that are 3-betting very tightly with weak hands, and then you're only 3-betting strong hands in spots where people are probably folding a little bit more often than you think. Those are obviously not kind of the same spot, but we'll look at both different spots. And so the big picture sort of thing that we need to realize here is that all of these mistakes, and I mean, perhaps you could argue that almost any mistake in poker traces back to this, but, all 3 of these big sort of money-losing mistakes that you could be making can be traced back to understanding ranges. We'll start with value betting. People that don't value bet thinly enough don't understand the range of hands that their opponent is likely to call them down with, and they don't realize that it's much wider than the range of hands that, say, we might call down with if the positions were switched, right? This is how we make money, is by trading these mistakes with our opponents, and capitalizing on their mistakes. So, ranges, let's keep that up. Folding, post flop, or lack thereof. You got to realize that when somebody check raises you in a no-limit hold'em game, micro stakes, especially if they're relatively, passive, which most people are, they're not doing this with one pair, unless they're kind of maniacal or something, or, maybe if they pick up a huge draw or something like that. They're usually doing it with a hand that at least beats top pair, top kicker, which is the whole sort of emphasis behind the Beluga theorem, is that if your opponent, I'm paraphrasing greatly here, but if your opponent, is representing a certain hand, and you can't beat that hand, he's probably got it. He's probably not, calling the flop with a flush draw in order to ship the turn with his bare flush draw. You know what I mean? He probably had a set. In 1-2 or 2-4 game, you got to start worrying about this stuff a lot more, because people tend to be better at taking alternate lines, exploiting us. So if we start double barreling all the time, somebody who normally might have raised the flop with a draw might ship over our turn bet with a draw or something like that. But nobody's really adjusting like that down here. And so we don't want to sort of make things more complicated than they have to be. If you get raised on the turn and you don't have a near nut hand, or at least, a decent two pair, you let go of the hand, no big deal. And one thing to keep in mind is that, if top pair, top kicker is a fold, then bottom two pair is probably a fold as well, because in terms of relative strength, they're right next to each other. And if you think about equity, if top pair, top kicker doesn't beat a single hand in your opponent's range, then that means when you have bottom two pair, unless your opponent also has bottom two pair, you're chopping with them, right? And so you therefore also still don't beat almost all the hands in your opponent's range. And likewise, when you have two pair, your equity sucks because you only have 4 outs most of the time, so on and so forth. So you can kind of see, we need to really just play pretty straightforward when we get raised post flop, and give our opponents credit. And then the 3-betting game, again, about thinking about ranges. A lot of it is just not understanding, sort of, I guess, combinations of hands, and how, I guess, what percentage of a range can continue when we 3-bet. So for example, if somebody is raising 30% on the button and folding to, or excuse me, if let's just say they're raising, say, 30% on the button, how often do they need to be, folding for us to 3-bet them profitably? And the thing is, most people are that are good enough to sort of be stealing that many blinds are actually probably good enough to fold to 3-bets pretty often. But that said, we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. All right, cool. Oh, and before I move on, I wanted to talk about point 1 again real quick, value betting. We're not just going to look at value betting, but we're also going to look at just any sort of spot where maybe we should follow up with a double barrel on the turn. I listed it as value betting because that's sort of the biggest area where people are going to be struggling, but we're also going to be looking at spots where we could 2-barrel bluff. I guess that's really the main thing. We're not going to go past that. I don't really think 3-barreling is going to be too profitable in micro stakes in many spots, at least not enough spots that I'm going to devote any time to it today. And it's not something that I would be trying to do very often. If you watch my videos, the previous videos in the series, you'll see my strategy is to sort of get in there and play a lot of small pots aggressively, get people to think that, I can have anything at any time, and then when the big money goes in, I show up with the nuts. There was a hand in the last video, if you missed it, where some nit flopped a top pair no kicker against me, and I hit a set, and he was willing to stack off based on my image, or at least I think it was based on my image. So I believe that was the last video. Maybe it was the second video. I'm sorry, I can't remember. It's late. And anyhow, moving on to the meat, though. So the first thing we're going to look at would be point 1, value betting or barreling. And we're going to, again, so let me bring up Hold'em Manager real quick here to just give you a quick idea of what we're going to do here. And you can see these are the hands that I have played so far as part of the series. The original idea for this series was actually several months ago, so a few of the hands are from from a while ago. But I just thought I'd show all of them to you guys so that you can see my samples. You can see I'm not really doing super hot at 5 cent, 10 cent. I definitely attribute that to me spewing around a lot, trying out weird lines and stuff, and I'm sure once we go through the filters you'll see that at least in a couple of spots. And for what it's worth, I didn't go through all of these filters yet. I went through, the process to make sure I would be able to pick the right filters, but I haven't actually looked at the results of most of the filters yet. So you're going to see basically what I would suggest doing on your own time, and I'll it'll sort of be like I'm coaching myself almost, I guess, because I'll have to correct my own mistakes. But that's what you guys should be trying to do all the time, right? So hopefully this will give you some of the tools you need to do that. So I guess real quick before we do start talking about barreling, let's look for a minute at the stats. So 25 NLs on the top and 10 NLs on the bottom because we're going to lose that when we scroll. So I'm clearly doing way better at 10 NL, or 25 NL, excuse me, but the sample size is lacking in both areas. But 10K hands, 5 BB per 100 total, nothing to nothing to be too upset about at all. That's a very solid win rate. I think that you can sustain higher win rates than that at micro stakes if you're really crushing. But the thing is, if you can beat 25 NL for 5 PTBB per 100, or especially if you let's take a more extreme example. Let's say if you can beat 25 NL for 8 PTB per, excuse me, that's a mouthful, PTBB per 100, then you only need to be able to beat 50 NL for 4 BB per 100 or slightly more for it to be profitable for you to move up. So that's I guess between 25 and 50 NL, it's not so much of an issue as it is, or excuse me, as a it's not as what I'm trying to say is it's not as easy to move up from 25 to 50 as it should be from like 5 NL to 10 NL, right? Because at least my students that have done well, and granted they could be running super hot, but they often put up numbers like 10 BB per 100, or excuse me, 20 BB per 100. And keep in mind I'm using big bets per 100, so if your win rate is like 15 or something like that, and you're holding manager over a large sample or whatever, it's probably in little BB, because it's pretty tough to sustain much over, I don't know, at low stakes, it's probably pretty tough to sustain much over 8 to 10 in the long run, although I'm totally just pulling that number out of my ass sort of based on my observations. But anyhow, what I was going to say is if you're beating, it's much more applicable, I would say, at like 5 to 10 NL. If you're beating 5 NL for 10 PTBB per 100, you're almost certainly going to beat 10 NL for 5 PTBB per 100, right? And that's all you really need to do in order to make the same hourly rate, and that's what it really comes down to. Of course, hourly rate isn't the only thing. We should actually, before I give any misinformation, sorry for the the sidetrack comment, but um, while we're developing, hourly rate is definitely not our primary concern. In economics class, I love analogies. Again, forgive me if it is not worthwhile, I guess. But in economics class, we talk about labor supply and how when people are starting out, you give up working. If you're going to go to college, you give up working for 4 years because you expect to make so much more money when you get out of college that it's sort of worth that to you, right? Well, learning poker is absolutely no different. If anything, learning poker is much more difficult than getting a college degree. I think that just about anybody reasonably intelligent could get a college degree, but I don't think that just about anybody reasonably intelligent could beat online poker. Just because I think it's so counterintuitive in so many ways, and it requires just a certain way of thinking about life in general. Most online poker players would probably suck at. Again, I'm totally generalizing based on sort of myself to a degree, but most online poker players might be really good logical, analytical thinkers, but suck at writing papers or something like that, right? But anyway, I digress quite a bit. Let's get back to the video. And again, I hope I don't offend anybody with that. I just think it's a fact, and I think that we should try to accurately portray reality. Especially when it comes to our poker schema, if you will, if you remember that term from the Dog His Head video, which if you haven't seen his first video of Dog His Heads Up, it's really, really great. He talks about your poker learning schema, so to speak, which is very, very interesting. Anyway, enough sidetracks. Sorry about that, folks. Got a lot of material to cover here. So, you can see that I actually, I played a little bit, more conservative at 25 NL, which I think goes along with my conclusions sort of in the first few videos, that the worse and looser people are, the more you can exploit them, and therefore the looser you can play yourself, so on and so forth. You can actually see that, I did actually play slightly looser at 25 NL, but I folded to more 3-bets at 25 NL. These really, I mean, look how almost insignificant these differences are, except for the 3-bet percent. And I'm not, I mean, it's just sample size, honestly. I couldn't really explain any logical reason why I would 3-bet more at 10 NL than 25 NL. I mean, I actually think that I should probably, over the long run, end up 3-betting more at 25 NL, simply because people are folding more often to 3-bets, and also folding post-flop if they do call a 3-bet. So that, I think, should incentivize me to 3-bet more myself. As far as, folding 3-bets, pretty similar amount, because I think that nobody's really 3-betting that light in these games. Again, though, keep in mind sample size. Squeeze percent, pretty standard. That's going to be kind of related to the 3-bet, although in lower stakes games, squeezing, I think, is probably in general less profitable because people don't fold as often, especially, the fishy guys caught in the middle might call, and so that doesn't mean you should never squeeze, but it does mean that you shouldn't squeeze too much junk, unless you're facing, multiple tight players. You can see I actually stole more blinds in 25NL by a, relatively significant amount, about 10% more. That could, I'm not going to say it every time, I guess. Keep in mind these all could clearly be sample size, but what could this be? I guess people at 25NL fold to steals more often, They're not quite as loose. They're not calling down quite as late post-flop either, which means that I can open up my range more pre-flop, a little bit, since I don't have to worry about getting to showdown with junky hands. One win soft flop, sample size here I think doesn't really, it's very high compared to what most of yours might be, because as you've probably seen, I like to bluff and barrel and pick up a lot of pots, and that's what one win soft flop is sort of a measure of. And then went to showdown, converging around 24. One money at showdown is around 47 or 46, which is below 50%. I'm not winning. I'm winning less than half of my showdowns, but I'm winning big pots when I get to showdown, and I'm also picking good spots to call river bets given the pot odds, where I don't need to win anywhere close to even 50%. Again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. You only need to almost any river bet you're facing is going to be a pot size bet or less, meaning you only need to have the best hand 33% or more, or excuse me, or less. Now, granted, we have to determine when those sort of 33% or less times are, but the moral of the story is here, this number can be below 50% and you can still be a strong winning player. As far as the c-betting numbers go, again, most of this other stuff I think is just going to be attributed to sample size more or less, but you can see it is relatively consistent across both limits, which is a sign that the games really play very similarly. And so far you can see my standard deviation is a little bit higher at 10NL, which is one form of measuring your variance. But I think that's because I spewed off a few stacks at 10NL. And again, like I said, we'll probably get to see a few of those when we go through the filters. Cool. Alright, so now that we've gone over the basic stats, let's start talking about the first set of filters for barreling. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to look at two different sort of situations. One is going to be value betting and the other is going to be bluffing. We'll actually, I guess I probably should have reordered this a bit in the slides, because I think that this is probably what we would want to do second. But the idea being, we want to use these filters in Hold'em Manager to get as specific as we can to for lack of a better term, to filter out all the noise of hands where we just fold and nothing happens, and so on and so forth. So what we really want to do is check permutations of a few filters here. One being flop c-bet possible but not attempted. So there's a spot where maybe you had a profitable value bet that you missed. The next one would be flop c-bet equals true. Turn bet possible but not attempted. So this would be times that you c-bet the flop and your opponent either checked to you or perhaps you were first to act, and you could have bet again but you did not. Then sort of the last one that we really want to look at would be flop and turn bet equals true and river bet not attempted. So what these represent would be the first one being a missed flop c-bet for value, the second being a missed flop c-bet, or excuse me, a made flop c-bet and then a missed turn bet, and then the last one being a one where you bet the flop and turn and then check back or checked to your opponent on the river here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take each of these filters and we're going to just look at all the hands and see where I may have made any mistakes. And I'm also going to I'm going to try to point out spots where I think you guys might make some typical mistakes as well. And so yeah, like I said, I think that these 2 points should probably be reordered a little bit, because in general, this right here that I've got highlighted is what you need to do to start finding the problems. So Okay, so I actually reordered it here for you guys so that it makes more sense. So what we're going to first do is check the filters based on the action, and then after we have looked at that, we're going to be able to narrow it down a little bit. And you might not need to do this part right here just because you might not have enough hands and you might be able to see everything really easily. But if you have a large database, it helps to filter as narrowly and specifically as you can in order to really find the problems, right? So plus if you filter a specific thing, you can actually see the totals in terms of how much money you're up or down from, missed value bets and, bluffing too much or whatever, you know what I mean? So what you want to do is filter to see just the value or bluff lines. And so the criteria that I have here would be any hand value that's greater than second pair is what we're going to look at for value betting, because that's the type of hand against fish that we should be trying to get a little bit of thin value. And then we're going to similarly look at hands that are less than or equal to top pair. Well, really, I guess it should just be less than, but I'm not going to go change the symbol. It took a while to find it in the manager here. But basically any hand that's less than top pair. So we're really gonna you're kind of gonna see some overlap here, because second pair hands fall under both categories, because there are some times where we can profitably barrel second pair. Not as many as times where we could probably profitably, value bet, but that's kind of what we're going to look for, is trying to figure out when we're betting, is it mostly for value, mostly as a bluff, or does it turn out that our bet actually fills neither? So if, again, let's think about the three main reasons for betting, one being value, two being bluff, and three being capitalization of dead money. There are plenty of spots where betting doesn't actually accomplish any of those things. The classic example would be in position, you flop kings on an ace-high board against a reasonable player. If you bet that flop, he is probably just going to fold everything that you're beating and call with everything that's beating you. Again, kings on an ace-high dry board, right? So if we find ourselves betting a lot of these spots, we really want to make sure that we're not value cutting ourselves. If you see the bottom bullet here, and so value cutting ourselves would simply be betting for value when in reality we're not getting called often enough by a worse hand. So by definition, a value bet on, say, the river is a bet that gets called when you're called, your hand is good at least 50% of the time, right? So value cutting yourself would be a bet where if you get called, sure, you might get value against some hands, but most of the hands are going to be beating you. A good example might be, well, I already gave you an example. The kings on the ace-high board is really the best possible example, I would say, because by checking that flop, you lose less money when you're behind, and you might be able to induce bluffs if your opponent is not an amazing hand reader. Against good hand readers, we have to be a little more careful, but that's not what we're really going to be talking about here. For micro stakes, we're going to be talking about the ways that we can exploit our opponent's tendencies, given that they are not going to be good hand readers, given that they are going to typically be too passive, and sort of let us kind of run them over, right? All right. So let's actually get into it. Let me pull Hold'em Manager back up, and we will start looking. So to get to the filters, it's conveniently labeled here in the sort of top middle right. Filters, edit here. And so you can filter for whatever limits you want up here. I'm assuming you guys are somewhat familiar with this stuff. But really, these filters are amazing, and there's so much stuff that I'm not going to cover today, clearly, in the span of an hour. I mean, hell, it's already 23 minutes, and I haven't even started the filters, because y'all know how I love to rant. At least some of you, I'm sure, can attest. Chazbot calling you. Anyway, you really should try to spend a lot of time getting to know Hold'em Manager. In fact, I think that there are whole websites devoted towards making the most out of Hold'em Manager, and I don't know the names of them, but any sort of poker education that you can get your hands on would typically behoove you. I don't think any of us here at Deuces Cracked would say you should only watch Deuces Cracked videos, although we are not going to actively advertise for other sites, but I personally at least want you guys to be winning, so take advantage of all the opportunities you can, even if it's not on Deuces Cracked. Anyway, let's get to what we're actually talking about, which would be the filters for the flop starting out. So, really the flop c-betting one is probably not the best one in terms of actually looking at barreling. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to skip that one. Flop continuation bet made equals true, I guess would be sort of what you looked at. Well, I'll show you guys just so that you can see. It's actually really cool to go through this and take a look at really just where does your profit come from when you play poker. And you can see I was only up 20 bucks at 5 cent, 10 cent no limit, but I'm actually up $130 in pots where I c-bet. So what we might want to do is actually go ahead and look, at some of these hands where we lost and see if maybe we made a bad c-bet. What I'm actually going to do here is, use the preview here to skip over hands that I think are probably standard. For example, fives where I flop a set and I lose to a higher set. It's not really going to be a mistake, probably, right? Here, 6-7 offsuit, I bet, called a raise, and got it all in on the flop, and he has ace-queen. Clearly I didn't make a mistake here. But what we're going to look for is maybe a spot where I could have checked back. Alright, here's one. I had a weak king. I'm not going to go through too many of these specific examples, but no reason not to look at a few. Okay, so I was actually going to look at a hand where I flopped top pair, but I noticed while I was rearranging my stats just now that there's a little bit better hand, I think, that sort of illustrates what we're trying to look for here a bit better. So this is a hand where I, let's go through the action. We get a raise, call, I 3-bet, 3-bet squeeze with ace-king, and this guy calls in position with jack-3 suited. And we get this flop, and so the question becomes, well, should I have bet this flop or not? And so we have to think about what our opponent's range is and how likely it is to hit this flop. Now, what we see here is when the guy is this incredibly loose, if he has, and I'm not backing this up with any mathematical analysis, but I think that it's pretty clear, if his range is loose enough to contain a hand like jack-3 suited, it's also loose enough to contain so much other bullshit that has to fold on this flop. If he has jack-3 suited here, he probably has queen-5 suited. Queen-5, queen-6, queen-7, queen-8, queen-10 doesn't fold, so I guess up to queen-8, or queen-8 probably might not fold too because it's a gut shot, but, queen-7 or lower has to fold. A 10x has to fold. 8x has to fold. King-x suited type hand has to fold as well. All kinds of stuff. He's probably not going to continue that often with a small pocket pair. If he does have bare overcards himself, like ace-king or ace-queen, there's a very good chance he'll fold them, although if he does call, we'll probably get to showdown, at least a lot of the time. And when we get called here, we have 6 outs against a lot of his likely hand range, and if we look at the bet size, we're only risking 10 into 13, so even if he shoved into us, let's really quickly, these pot odds are incorrect here based on the effective stacks, I believe, so I'll bring up the calculator and we'll calculate, our pot odds here. And so what we'll kind of see is, without doing too much math, our bet here probably doesn't need to work that often. So what I like to do, actually, to clarify what I'm about to calculate here is, since he's got a less than a pot size bet left, and our only other option besides shoving would be to check, we have to see how close to a profitable spot it would be to check call. Assuming that we would have like 25-ish% equity when we get it in, which I think is relatively safe to assume. Maybe we could assume a little less, like 22 or something. But so what we do is we take the 1350 plus the 1050. 24 and then divided by 1050. So we would be getting about 2.28 to 1 in terms of percentages. In terms of percentages, we would need to have about 30% equity to check call and all in here. Considering how incredibly wide his range is, and the fact that when we do get it in against a hand like this, our equity is only well, I guess against this exact hand, our equity is pretty crappy because of his flush draw, but most of the time he's not going to have a flush draw. He's just going to have a Jack-X type hand, and we're going to have more than 12% equity. We're going to have more like 24% equity, and so you can kind of see that when there's only a 6% equity difference, you really almost barely ever need him to fold in order to make up that difference. And so I definitely think that this is a profitable spot based on all the factors. Plus, you can see so far he has folded to some c-bets. 67%. Actually, the sample's decent. 67% out of 21. Looks like 0 out of 1 in flop 3-bet pots, but that would be this hand. So we didn't have a read on how we would play in a 3-bet pot, but again, I don't think it really matters too much if we are aware of how wide his range is. Then we can definitely ship here with our sort of nut overs based on equity alone, and well, nearly based on equity alone, and based on even just having a tiny amount of fold equity, I guess. Alrighty, so that was the first one. That was the flop c-bet possible. And so I actually showed, continuation bet made equals true instead of continuation bet made equals false. What you want to do is sort of go through all of these and look for specific spots. And again, I don't have time to do all of them, but I'm going to try to show a couple more. So, make sure you're looking at spots where you did bet the flop and also spots where you didn't bet the flop. Not just really one or the other. And likewise, for all this stuff, you should be looking at spots where you did value bet on 3 streets and then got looked up by a worse hand, not just spots where you missed value bets too. So I didn't include that. If we go over here, you can see I didn't really include that. I was saying really to look at spots where you missed value, but we should also look at spots where you try to get too much value. Or really not even that so much as just spots where maybe you tried to barrel incorrectly as a bluff. The point is to look at all of the different possible actions that you could take as part of sort of your overall strategy, and to consider your range in each of those spots and whether or not it's appropriate. Should I be value betting this guy with a wide range or not? Should I be bluffing this guy with a wide range or not? Anyway, so what was the next one? The next one would be turn. Okay, so this is the real one that we're going to look at, is sort of where you, or sort of, I would say this is sort of the first really big spot that people are going to be leaking is the turn. So basically here we're just looking at turn continuation bet made equals true, or false. Now keep in mind, if you put both of these down, and this is something I wanted to point out earlier, Hold'em Manager unfortunately does not allow or as far as the sort of Boolean goes here. It's always and, so it only looks at spots where all of these filters are possible. It doesn't let you look at a spot where either or is possible, and that'll become more of a problem when we get to the beluga whale, or excuse me, the beluga theorem filters. But anyway, again, at this point you kind of get the idea of what I'm trying to do, and the hand analysis is sort of secondary to sort of figuring out how to use Hold'em Manager to find the problem areas. So let's look at spots where I did make a turn continuation bet, just because I think that I'm not really going to have too many spots where I mistakenly missed them. So here what I'll do also is I'll show you the hand strength filter. So let's click back over here again, and we'll just remind you what we're going to look at is hands greater than second pair for barreling, and then hands less than top pair for bluffs. And for barreling, again, this is really value betting, not barreling. Alrighty. So in order to do that, you go to the same filters page up here, yet we got to go to a different tab. What we have to go to would be the hand values tab right here, if you can see that. We just click over here, and this is really, really awesome. Like I'm telling you guys, Hold'em Manager is a ridiculously powerful tool. Here you can look at any hand value on the flop, turn, or river, flush draws, straight draws, so on and so forth. And one of the really cool things is you can sort of evaluate the hand value as it progresses. So you could start out where trying to find spots where maybe on the flop you just had 2 overcards, right? But then by the turn you have at least some sort of top pair, right? So you would use shift. You hold now, so to select multiple in anything on a Windows computer or a Mac computer, as far as I know, you would hit shift click to select multiple that are in a row. So you can see here I single click top pair weak kicker, press down shift, click top pair good kicker, and it selects all of those. You can see that we kind of can do that all the way down here, and it'll sort of cut it where you live off if you go back up to the middle, if you like overshoot it or something. And then again, a little Windows tip just for you guys, because you have to use this, you have to know about this, unfortunately, or else you would not be able to get the most out of Hold'em Manager. But not just shift click like this again, but control click and I think on a Mac, I guess maybe it would be Apple click or something. I'm not positive though, because I know Apple has control too. They're stupid. I hate them. Anyway, control click, you can see, lets us just sort of go wherever we want here and skip. But what we're probably going to do, most of the time we'll be using the shift click because all of the hand values we want to look at are going to be really close together, and we're not really going to skip anything, right? So let's see, we're going to do value first. So what we'll do here, we're gonna just pretend that we started on the flop with a strong hand, because again, like I just said, there are plenty of spots where you might start out on the flop with overcards, end up with a pair by the river, so on. So what we can actually do here is just, let's see, we'll take one pair here, over pair. Actually, we are going to need to control click because we're going to get rid of a few things. So we're going to look at value betting hands, right? So over pair, a pocket pair, that's second pair. We're going to look at top pair, good kicker, or basically any top pair and any second pair. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, you can see it gets a little bit complicated. I wasn't anticipating all this, so we'll just shift click all of the hands better than one pair, just because some of these I'm not entirely even sure without thinking for a second what it means. Like two pair, both cards paired, top two pair. Oh, I see. Two pair, pair plus pair. Okay, I get it. Never mind. Anyway, yeah, we're gonna look at all these, and then likewise, we're gonna look at the same thing on the turn and the river. So, really, I guess if we have these set up for the flop, we can do any turn hand value because you have to have, your hand can't get, in relative terms, your hand can get worse, but if you flop a pair, you always have a pair, right? So that's all that matters, is as long as we're looking at any hand that's, oh, and actually, damn it, we lost our top pair. Let me redo that again real quick. Yeah, we're going to look at all the top pair, second pair, and yeah, we might as well just look at it all. Okay. Alright, like I said, I haven't looked at all these, and so this does surprise me a little bit. So it turns out that when I am betting with top pair or better, I'm actually losing a little bit of money. Very, very interesting. So we'll look and see why. Again, I only have 109 total hands where I even was able to barrel, and I'm only down a buy-in, right? So it's not even that much, really, and it is exactly a buy-in if you aggregate across the two stakes. It's 80 BBs here and 20 BBs here, pretty much. So, so yeah, let's take a look at some hands here. Let's see, maybe this guy right here. So this is what I would do. Again, this is the board. The less exciting part, probably, because you guys know how to look at hands, but we'll look and see, maybe where we made a mistake. So we get massive action with aces, bet the flop, get called, bet the turn. Oh, see this now this right here is just a cooler. He shoves the turn. We should often be looking to get away from hands in some of these spots, but given how loose he is and the pot odds I'm getting, I was planning on stacking off here anyway. He's got 22 total in a 15 pot, so my whole plan here is to bet enough that I think he could still, ship in with some worse hands, and definitely not really looking to fold to a raise here. So this is a little bit different than some of the beluga spots we'll get later on, just because of our stack to pot ratio here. You can see, $19 left, 15 in the pot. There's no way in hell we can really fold. Whereas if we didn't get like 4 callers pre-flop, the pot size would be more like $4 on the, or $3 or $4 on the flop. On the turn, it would be what, the bet sizes would really be close to half all the way down the line, right? So, or at least half on the flop, which would cause the bet sizes down the line to be smaller. They grow exponentially, so I guess it's not fair to say they'd be half on every street, but anyway, you can kind of see it didn't really make a mistake there, so there was some run bad. Here was a set over set type of hand. Now this one could be a little bit thin. Let's look at this one. Here's one where I stacked off with an overpair. I raise pre-flop and get called by a guy with tens. Very little, information on him. He check calls and check calls again. And then he checks to me on the river, and I shipped it, and he called with 10. So here's a spot where I went for like really, really thin value. In order to analyze this hand properly, we might have to do a little bit of stoving, but I think that against an 86-29, okay, he showed up with 10s once, but again, when I'm value betting him, I only have to have the best hand 50% of the time or more. And 10s is probably one of the absolute best hands that he shows up with here, other than like a slow play. Um, and so when he check calls all the way down and checks to me, it's so overwhelmingly likely that he just has a 5, maybe some kind of worse pocket pair. The problem being that, some of the pocket pairs beat me, sure. 3s now beats me, 7s now beats me, but I think that he would put in some kind of a bet with those hands earlier anyway. I don't think he would, mainly I don't think that he would check the river. So, you can see here, I think I played this hand well, even though I lost to a better hand. I still think that my decisions are correct here. Cool. So you can kind of see what we're getting at here. Again, I don't have time to go through a ton of hands, but we can see there, these are the spots where the turn bet was made equals true. And really, for the last one, let's look at spots where the turn bet was true and then the river bet was false. Just because maybe we can see some spots where we missed value, or maybe we can see if we did take a correct line. So, we'll combine these two filters. And again, we're still looking at our hole cards for, what do we got here? Yeah, our flop hand value is, at least a pair, right? So we're going to be looking at spots where we have a pair and we did not bet the river. Alright, so you can see we're actually down a pretty significant amount of money. So what we ought to do is look for spots where we had a pair and didn't bet the river, where we maybe could have gotten some value. And so, let me try to find a good hand. Yeah, so we want a river spot where we checked. I'm trying to see if there's a good one. I mean, most of these so far look pretty good. Like, correct. Again, it's going to be hard for me to find spots where I didn't value bet effectively on the river, simply because I'm not the one that has that leak. But you kind of get the idea. We'll, I mean, if you look here, you can see this was a king 10 hand where the river went, let me bring it over here for you to see. This isn't really what we're looking at. We raise king 10 and the guy check calls down and then like ships the turn or something, or ships the river when he misses or something like that, and I like snap called him because of the pot odds. And that's not really a super illustrative hand, I guess. But what we would want to look for is spots where maybe he does check and we find ourselves actually checking behind, and we see that he shows up with like something like king 5 suited or something like queen 10. If we're checking back and winning a lot of pots that way, we really should be sort of concerned that we're not getting enough value where we should be. There's no reason for us to win that many hands at showdown without a river bet going in, because if our opponent is even showing up on the river with that much, of a bad hand, we need to be trying to get him to put more money in. Alright, so hopefully you can see you can see what we're getting at here with these filters, and really I looked at some stuff that would apply to Beluga too, but we're going to look at some more specific filters there. And unfortunately I can't go through all of these due to time constraints, but if you do try any of these other filters and you need some help either analyzing your results or just having trouble getting the filter set up at all, that's what the forums are for. Please feel free, because this is a pretty complicated topic. And I really wanted to make you guys more aware of how to find the leaks than really how to fix them, I guess. Because I've told you what the leaks are, and the whole rest of the series is sort of about not making the mistakes, but this should help you find the mistakes. Alright, so we'll move along. So the next set of filters is going to be the Beluga theory, testing the Beluga theory. And so overwhelmingly, every time I go look through a student's database who is not making money at their current stakes, it is largely because they do not fold when facing aggression on later streets. So what we need to do is look at some filters. These first two up here are actually two filters that I think are fairly new to Hold'em Manager, because it used to be much more difficult, or at least maybe I missed them before, but you used to have to do these more specific ones down here that are still useful but not quite as good at finding general leaks. But anyway, it's pretty simple. once you learn how to sort of do one filter, the rest of them are kind of straightforward, just because it's usually just a set of truth values that you have to set up, right? So what we're going to be looking for was spots where the turn or the river was raised equals true. And if we want to get more specific, we can look at spots where the turn or river was check raised equals true. But the thing is, the first one here will include the times you get check raised, right? Because it doesn't differentiate between getting raised in position or out of position when it just says was raised with no, other qualifier, so to speak. So, these top two are sort of the general filters, and if you want to get more specific by looking at each individual street, these are the filters that you're going to need, and these are probably not all of them, but, these are sort of the big ones where, so the way the filters are set up, in fact, I'll just go ahead and show you. They're set up kind of weirdly, which is why I was happy, like I just pointed out, that they have seemingly improved them a bit, but, if we scroll down here to, say, the turn filters, you see all these crazy ones like turn bet equals true, turn bet fold equals true, bet call, bet raise, raise call, so on. Well, these are just basically all of the possible sort of combinations of actions that they would expect you to take in order that you would take them. So turn bet fold literally means that you bet and then folded on the same street, and then, so on. Turn raise fold means you raised and then folded on the same street, etc. So we'll go back. Oh, and I'll show you the other two real quick. I gotta find them actually. There we go. Turn was raised, turn was check raised. So those are kind of below. So let's go ahead and just look at the first turn was raised equals true, and we'll see how I am doing. Oh, actually, let's go ahead and remove the hand values. So for the barreling, I didn't show you the filters for bluffing, for looking at two-barrel bluffing, but you would simply do the same thing that we did before while, doing it sort of backwards, where we look at one pair, you can kind of click, these second pair, bottom pair type. In fact, the paired board, that doesn't really count us as having a pair, so what are we trying to look for here? You can click some of these like two pair where you have a pocket pair and a paired board where your pair is less than the pair on the board. That's a spot where you might want to bluff. Bottom pair, second pair, kind of anything that just says bottom and second pair. The two pair with a paired board is sort of what we're looking at though, because if you have two pair with your two hole cards, you're rarely going to be bluffing, right? And so the rest of these should be. We're not even going to look at like trips on board, four of a kind on board, although technically you would want to look at those. But yeah, so let's see, one pair on a paired board with overcards, meaning that we don't have our own pair. So these are gonna, that would be something that we would want to look at. Bottom pair, second pair, basically everything but top pair or better, So I guess these would be the sort of filters, and you can go back and rewatch, but you can see which ones I sort of have clicked in here. Is all the one pair or no pair that are or two pair here again, because they're not really considering relative strength, because if you have two pair in this spot, then everybody has at least one pair, right? So you see the idea here. For the bluffing spot, if you wanted to use these filters, you would just look at these hand values and tailor it to your needs. Again, it's not that important that you learn exactly what I'm telling you, but just how to use the program in general is sort of the real important stuff. So let me make sure that so we'll do any. And for the more filters, we need to go back to getting raised on the turn. So we'll show just that first one where we're facing, there we go, turn was raised equals true. And you can see that I'm down a bunch of money. Now, it's not really important to just note how much are you down. It's also important to note how much, would you have been down if you had played the hand differently, because, you're going to probably be down money when you get raised in most spots, because most of the time you have to fold, right? And when you fold, you don't win any money. So, let's try to take a decent example. And so for here, actually, what, it really does become a bit more useful to look at spots where you do have, a certain hand value of, let's just look at all the times where we have worse than, in fact, let's just use 2 pair to keep it simple. That way we don't have to, control click too much and use crazy filters. We'll show this. And in fact, I actually want to, I'm going to edit that filter one more time. I'm actually going to take out hands where I have air, because we are trying to look at hands where we should be folding to a raise when we were value betting, excuse me. So, if we're bluffing, clearly we're folding to a raise, right? So let's see here. Okie dokie. So this right here is probably a perfect example, and this is one of the hands that I actually was going to look at before, but a perfect example of me, not really paying attention to the Beluga theorem in the way that I should. So this guy is pretty tight so far. It's only 16 hands. We raised the small blind and he calls. I could have raised the 4x there, but given that he's unknown, wasn't really sure how he would react, I decided to just do 3, give him a bit of keep the pot a little small to start out and see if he would fold to 3, because if he'll fold to 3, then I'm just going to keep stealing for 3. Clearly I don't expect him to fold 5s to any size bet, so it doesn't really tell us much, but anyway, we bet and he calls, and then I turn 2 pair and I bet, and he raises now. So this is exactly what I was saying about, it's not even just top pair hands, but hands that are not as strong as top pair as well. So we have to think, what might this guy's range be here? Alright, so we'll start, I'm going to bring up PokerStove, and, we'll start with a very basic range for him, which is going to only include hands that I'm losing to. And so you can see I'm totally crushed if this is his range. So what we need to now do is start including hands that I might be beating, right? So, well, I don't know, look at this. I've got top and bottom, so what am I beating? I'm beating him if he has like 5-6 suited that he's decided to now raise with. The thing is, if somebody does have 2 pair and they get to the turn this way, they typically tend not to value it quite as strongly as they do, a hand like a set, even though against your range they're probably doing just as well. So that's worth noting that people tend to play 2 pair a little more passively than sets most of the time. And so we look here, and we only added in one hand, 6-5 suited, which is only 2 combos, but we want to see how that affects things. So, okay, so if he can ever have 2, 6-5 suited, then our equity is still pretty rough, but it's not awful. What other hands might he have that we're beating? Maybe 4-5 suited. If we add that in, our equity will probably improve a bit. Yeah, we get about 5% more. We add in a hand like maybe 6-4 suited, which is unlikely, but it could still be there. All right, and so now we start getting up to some decent equity at least, 33% equity. But if we look here, if this is his range, and I didn't even include better 2 pair than us. I didn't include King 6 or King 5 suited or anything like that, just because we can't really be so sure that he would call them. But if he would, that would clearly make our equity worse, right? So now, out of these hands, which ones am I actually beating? I'm beating 6-4 if he even plays that pre-flop, 5-4 if he even continues on this flop. So you can see like the best case scenario here I'm giving is really sort of wishful thinking almost. And really, if I'm going to be accurate, I should include something like what? The King 6 and the the King 5 type hands, which are going to clearly hurt our equity, although not too much. Now we might think, well, how can you put this guy on such a tight range? What if he sometimes might do this with Ace King, and of course PokerStove sucks, and I just lost all that. I don't know why it does that sometimes, but it often loses it like cancels out or selects all or something. It sucks. But anyway, I'll just go ahead and put it back in. It's not really that big of a deal. What am I missing? The suited kings and some like 4-6, 5-6 type stuff. Okay, yeah, I think that's about where we were before. It's close if it's not exactly the same. So, well, what if he would, play Ace King this way? Well, let's weight it a bit, because if he did have Ace King, we kind of have to assume that almost everybody would 3-bet here. Uh, maybe not almost everybody, but I would say at least like 80% of people would 3-bet ace king here. I hope that are playing somewhat tight and aren't like just big fish. Um, so we'll give him ace king suited only, which would here I guess it's only 2 combos of hands. So we'll just see how the 2 combos affect things. Okay, so if we give him those 2 combos, we get up to 33. Now what if we give him all the ace king combos? Well, our equity is still 44%, which means that given the dead money in the pot, we could probably get it in here if we knew that he always had ace king. But I think that it's really, again, more likely that he has ace king something like half the time, right? So let's or less, right? So let's uncheck like half of the suit or the offsuit ace king, and the suited ace king is already kind of weighted because there's only 2 combos based on the board in our hand, right? So we'll do that, and okay, 42%. I don't want to. I could do some more math. I'm not gonna get into the math. It's gonna take too long. I'm already starting to run out of time. But you can kind of see here that since this is pretty pretty wishful thinking, I would say, and it's actually possible if we look here at the ace king that we didn't eliminate any combos that weren't already eliminated. Or what am I trying to say? Yeah, we might not have eliminated many combos that weren't already eliminated. Let me try the other half of the combos, and we'll see how that changes. Yeah, so if we eliminate the other half of the combos, our equity goes down to 36. What happened before is I clicked ace king here, and it only actually took out a few. It only took out these sort of combos here instead of like a bunch of them, I think is what happened. Anyway, you get the idea. My mouse is screwing up. Sorry about that. I had a clicking problem for a second with my mouse. But anyway, you get the idea here. Basically, I think I should have folded here, and I think that if I was thinking and playing my A game, it probably would have been a pretty easy fold. You can kind of see up here on the date I was playing at 5 in the morning, and I was probably mad tired, and probably just not really, not playing my best, which is exactly why you got to play your best, because this is not by any means like a terrible, awful place to stack off, but it's certainly, based on the calculations that I just did, I certainly don't think it's plus EV, given that he's an unknown and we have no real reason to think that he would value bet a 1-pair hand this way, right? So this is a great example of where you can find a leak that you might have made. Well, you know what I mean. It's a good example of what we're trying to talk about here for the Beluga theorem. So I will, before I move on, let me just show you again real quick the specific sort of filters here. So turn was raised equals true. We'll delete that one because it does, I suppose it does make it a little bit more difficult to look at specific spots, although it's good for general analysis. But here's what we want: is sort of the bet call equals true. And again, keep in mind, you can't really. Well, I was going to say you can't show both of these at the same time. Because what we really want to look at is spots where we bet the turn and got raised. But what we can do actually is use a different combination of filters. So you can see, Hold'em Manager is pretty complex, and even I'm learning things while I'm trying to teach, which incidentally is one of the reasons I like teaching. I always learn something while I teach. But anyway, what we do then, I guess, would be turn bet equals true. And let's see. Oh, no, that's not what we wanted. We wanted... Yeah, so I was just thinking that, okay, so what you would do is turn raised equals true and then turn bet call equals true, although I'm actually starting to think that that might be redundant, so we can take like 2 seconds and check that. We'll see. So we end up with 6 and 9 hands here. If we take the turn was raised out... Sorry, my mouse is acting funny. If we do that and then hit okay, so yeah, okay, so it was redundant, so forget that. I guess I didn't actually learn anything after all. But you can see we end up with sort of like this same king 4 hand where we bet called the turn. We got a hand here where, I had 2 pair, or excuse me, yeah, I had 2 pair, and then some dude hit a flush, and, I probably could have folded this too. Let's look at it real quick. He flats my raise. I bet big. I could have bet bigger here. I think I should have bet like 150 for what it's worth. It's a very draw-heavy board. Very likely that he could call. Although I think that his stack size, which I just noticed, is probably why I bet a little bit smaller. You know, it's okay since he has a small stack. Um, and then likewise here, you know, given that he's got a short stack, and you know, I don't expect him to fold an ace here, especially if he has a spade to go with it. So I definitely think that we should stack off here. And he, you know, he did have a flush, no big deal. So okay, so this isn't really a mistake, but that's why we go through these to sort of double check. All right, so you know you can see that, and I yeah, you can see the more specific filter will let you you know limit or excuse me narrow it down to even less hands. And you definitely want to check out all four of these. So I'm not going to go through them again, but you can see all four of these here. Um, and you know, my last bullet should only. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied after an hour of talking. Um, you should nearly always fold top pair or worse at micro stakes, and you gotta love the little mew here. But anyway, you know, basically as evidenced by the last hand I did, you know, the range that I put somebody on the turn is almost always going to be very similar to that. You know, like a bunch of sets and strong two pair and straights and whatever else they're representing pretty much. If the board is really dry, you know, you might be tempted to think that it's hard for them to show up with a strong hand, and that might be true, but it's also typically a lot harder for microstakes players to show up with bluffs, just because they never bluff, almost ever on a later street. So, so you know, you should again, you know, keep this, you know, write this down. Uh, I say it almost every, you know, I'm probably going to try to say it every video, and I say it all the times in the forums. Key to beating the micros is the bet fold. Bet fold the flop. Bet fold. I mean, bet folding the flop is a little bit more questionable, just because oftentimes people will raise draws on the flop, and so you got to be a little bit more careful. But I would argue that at like 25 NL and below, especially if you folded every flop raise without a near, you know, with just a one pair hand, you'd probably make more money. And definitely on the turn of the river, you should almost always be folding those hands. So yeah, bet fold the flop, bet fold the turn, bet fold the river, and you will increase your win rate. I promise. I shouldn't promise, you know, you could make, you could adjust incorrectly, make mistakes, but if you apply the theory in my other videos correctly, you'll be fine. All right, so moving on to the last filter, I want to just take a quick look at 3-bet pots. You know, this is not the time or place to, excuse me, not the time or place to really discuss crazy 3-betting strategy. For that, I would recommend checking out some of the Professor Plotkin videos, as well as Unconventional Wisdom, you know, higher stakes videos where there's a lot more 3-betting going on and stuff like that. But you know, so you can see it's my main point here is it's really less important to look at specific spots, but really the most important thing is just to sort of take time to look at your overall 3-betting game. So you know, the simplest type of filter that we could put on it would be, and so the biggest leak, let me click back over for a second actually. The biggest leak that we're going to look at is facing 3-bet equals true, because people typically call way too much. Okay, so where we got it. Faced pre-flop 3-bet equals true. So the key here is to realize that just like in the last hand, if you are putting in money and then folding later, you're going to be down money overall in the spots where you're, you know, raised folding. And so what's important to note is, are you down more money in the overall spot total than you would have been if you had just folded every time, right? So at 25 NL, you know, 22 hands sample size, assuming that, you know, my single raise is going to average like 80, well, on average, yeah, we'll say it averages 85 cents, considering I open to, like, you know, I min raised in 3x and stuff like that a fair amount. You know, so 85 cents on average times, you know, you can see I'm down money at 10 NL, you know, so let's change it to 35. 35 cents times 29 samples. So if I'd folded every time, I would have been down $10. So you can see that you know, I might have just ran bad, but most likely I spewed off some chips or made a mistake, right? Again, small sample size, but if you're losing, you're probably losing because you made a bad with no other information, it's likelier that you made a bad play than it is that you ran bad, I would say. Um, just a bit of Bayesian probability there for you. But anyhow, let's do 25 NL instead. You can see that my results at 25 NL are much better, and we'll analyze why a little bit in a second. But 22 hands at 25 NL, I mean, here you're going to see that clearly I'm up a bunch of money compared to if I just folded. But, times 0.85. So I should be down $18 if I fold every time. Instead, I'm up a bunch of money, which is almost certainly this. I guess this kind of goes the opposite way of what I just said, but I would say this is almost certainly from running hot, just based on my knowledge of typical sort of earn rates when you get 3-bet. Basically, I think that most people are actually, if you look through your database, you'll find that you're either losing more than if you had just folded, or at the very least, you're going to find that you're not winning very much. So we want to look at basically all of those same sort of spots that we already looked at as far as barreling, folding when we get raised. What we have to realize though is that in a 3-bet pot, you do need to stack off a little bit lighter, but what's really important is to look for spots where you might be value cutting yourself. For example, betting queens on a king-high board in position in a 3-bet pot where your opponent's going to put you on ace-king so often that they're just going to fold all the hands you're beating. Stuff like that is what you really want to be looking for. And so that's why I said it's more important to look at specific hands, and think about think about your opponent's ranges, and how you can maximize against those ranges rather than, I mean, clearly that's what we're going to do in all these spots, but I guess what I'm getting at is there's not as, I guess the barreling and beluga time slides are sort of subsets of 3-bet pots, and so you want to consider just the overall spot, and then if you have trouble finding leaks, go through the steps that we just went, or that I just showed you on the first 2 slides here, and look at spots where you're barreling incorrectly, look at spots where you're not folding when you should be, and so on. And so let's see. I'm not, again, we're running out of time here, so I'm not going to go through all these, but more or less, you could see my overall stats. I fold the 3-bet about 70% of the time, and so that's probably a lot more than a lot of you, but that's what you got to do. People are not 3-betting light enough for you to be trying to play back too much. If I was playing $50 or 1-2 or something like that, my fold to 3-bet might be more like 60 instead of 70. But that's because people are 3-betting me with wider ranges, so I can continue more often. Here at microstakes, you typically don't have the odds to set mine, and so therefore, you don't really have the odds to call with much of anything when you get 3-bet. If somebody's range is aces, kings, queens, and ace-king, there's really not, if you can't call there with jacks, if you can't call there with deuces, likewise, you really can't call there with jacks either, because your equity is virtually the same against their whole range with either hand, right? I mean, I love Poker Stove, and I think it's underused still, so I'm just going to demonstrate that, and the equity will be slightly different due to things like straight possibilities, counterfeiting, but it's not going to be more than a few percent, I don't believe. So you can see here you're a 36% underdog, and with deuces it's going to be a little less, 34, barely, right? So the hand is exactly the same almost in terms of relative strength. So you got to play really tight when tight 3-betters raise you. Now some people might say, well, if a guy's range is that tight, how come you can't set mine? But it's mainly because of the times that he has ace-king. So let's say that like you knew somebody had aces. Well then, yeah, okay, I would probably set mine if I got 3-bet, especially if I was putting in, a relatively small percentage of my stack. But otherwise, you can't really do much, because all the times that they have ace-king and then they bet the flop and you have to fold, or the times that they have ace-king and you flop a set and then they fold, it really, really cuts back on your profitability. When you think about the combinations of hands, there's only 6 combos of queens or better each, so that means 18 combos total of pairs. But there's almost the exact same number of combos of ace-king, right? There's 16 total combos of ace-king, so almost half of his range is ace-king, And so against almost half his range, you're going to flop a set and top pair at the same time, like less than 5% of the time against half his range, right? So you're almost never going to flop a set and him, not almost never, I guess, but it's pretty rare compared to what most people think, I guess. Pretty rare that you're going to flop a set at the same time as your opponent has a hand strong enough to stack off with. And again, there's plenty of theory videos that talk about this, I guess, in more detail. I think in From the Ground Up, we pretty much cover the fact, we don't really go over the math, I guess, but we cover the fact that you shouldn't call 3-bets to set mine, unless you're deep. And I know somebody's going to ask this in the forums, so while I'm thinking about it, I would say that I would probably start considering calling more 3-bets 150, 140-ish big blinds deep. But it's really hard to say because it depends on your opponent's range, how aggressive they are, how likely they are to stack off with a worse hand, all kinds of stuff. So it's really not quite that cut and dry. Just in general, we need to fold quite a bit to 3-bets. And so the other thing that I wanted to point out was looking for spots where you could have 3-bet. And so it's not just about, working on our 3-betting game is not just about folding to more 3-bets, but also looking for spots where we can 3-bet profitably. And so, again, there's plenty of videos that discuss a bit of theory about ranges for this sort of thing. What hands are good to do it with, what hands aren't. For that, I would strongly recommend watching the coaching tree videos. Andrew and I talk about that stuff quite a bit in those, especially in the first season. I'm not even gonna lie, I haven't even seen all the second season, but I'm sure he and the other guys talk about it there too, quite a bit. Hopefully not too much, because I might get redundant, but anyway, don't tell him I said that. So anyway, what you want to look at would be, could 3-bet equals true, did 3-bet equals false? And this is sort of a very, sort of a broad, it's going to bring up a lot of hands where people raised and you just folded, you know what I mean? But the key is going to be to sort of look, actually, I got to take away some of these other filters, excuse me, sorry about that. Okay, so actually what we probably want is spots where we could 3-bet, but we didn't 3-bet, and that we folded, so we did not VPIP. That's really what we want. So yeah, holding manager can be a little complicated to figure out the right combination of filters, but again, that's what that's what this video is for, right? So let's see if that does it. And so when you're starting to 3-bet light, I would say that it's much better to start doing it in position. So I'll show you a couple more filters. Here on the main filter page, position, we'll just uncheck small blind and big blind, and I'm going to look dumb if I'm wrong, I guess, but I believe this should say $0 for all of these, because if we didn't VPIP and we're not in the blinds, we don't lose any money, right? Yeah, great. So this might be really, really, really boring to look at, but again, we can, because it's all hands where we just folded, and so it's kind of like looking at our hole cards to see if it's a spot where we could have, we could have raised or what have you instead of folding. It's interesting. It looks like every opportunity I had to 3-bet with Ace-Jack I took, unless I'm misinterpreting this data, which is kind of funny. But anyhow, that's not really what's important. What's important is showing you how you can sort of narrow this down even more if you want. So, hold manager, again, it's amazing. You can set up your position, you can set up your opponent's position. So just here for position of first raiser, put in like, middle and cutoff, right? We're on the button. We're looking for spots to 3-bet light, right? So what we actually want to do is take, we can keep narrowing it down. So spots where we're either in the cutoff or button and our opponent is either the cutoff or MP, right? And this will narrow it down quite a bit more. And again, this is going to be boring to go through. But studying anything is boring, right? And we have to do it if we want to get better. So here's a spot. This guy opened to $1. I have Ace-10. He is folding to 50% 3-bets. Could I 3-bet this? I think given 50%, he's in middle position, he's not opening that wide, I think it's a fold, right? So that's pretty simple. You know, I don't like a 3-bet here. And then we just move on to the next hand. And again, it's real boring, but you don't have to go through hands like 2-3 offsuit. We're kind of looking at stuff like ace-x, especially if we have some like suited aces, stuff like that. Again, it doesn't doesn't look like I was too keen to fold those pre-flop either very often, which is kind of interesting. But you know, you got to just kind of look through here and think about the you know, look at the, and I guess you could filter for those types of hands if you want, but it's kind of tedious. But just filter for types of hands that you would either 3-bet or fold pre-flop, like ace-x, king-x suited type hands perhaps. Maybe stuff like, you know, jack, well, maybe not, what am I trying to say here? Yeah, a hand like, you know, 7-10 suited. It's not really good enough to call with, but if you're in position against a guy that folds a lot, you can try to exploit that, right? And so you're thinking, well, how do I know when a guy is profitable to 3-bet or not? And so now that I'm done with the filters, I actually have a little bit of a bonus slide for you guys, which is a little bit of theory that I thought I'd throw in there. You know, I tried to make it a part of this slide about 3-betting. Kind of ran out of room, so I decided to make it a little bonus slide. So quick demonstration of why we might 3-bet light based on just our fold equity and how we can sort of calculate how much fold equity we need to 3-bet with any two cards. And so if you can calculate how often you can profitably 3-bet any two cards, then you can certainly profitably 3-bet, you know, some of the medium strength hands. Again, you know, I need to come up with a cool term for hands that you would normally fold or 3-bet. There should be a cool term for that. Anyway, you know, if 3-betting any two cards is profitable, then, you know, 3-betting a hand like ace-x suited is almost certainly more profitable because you cut down on the combinations of hands he has that can continue against you. You know, so that's why we sort of use this as our baseline. So somebody opens 3.5x on the button, which I think is pretty typical at low stakes. You know, people do tend to raise 3x sometimes, but, you know, the math is really something that you should practice yourself. So, you know, practice it with different, you know, raise sizes and re-raise sizes, and you know, think about your, you know, start thinking about some of these more high-level concepts, I guess. So anyway, you know, if we 3-bet, we're probably going to 3-bet the 12 BB, given that we're in the big blind and we want to raise, you know, that would be slightly more than the size of the pot, which I think is fine. So we're risking 11 BBs to win the 3.5 that he already put in, the 50 cents that the small blind has put in after he before he folds, and then the one big blind that we have already put in, given that we had to post big, right? So if we're 3-betting two 12 BBs, it's two 12 BBs total, meaning 11 more on top. Sorry about that. Mouse wheel error, which is why the slide changed. Anyway, you know, so we can simply calculate this math. You know, it's relatively basic math as far as, you know, poker math goes, but it's math that I think a lot of people don't really understand. It's calculating the odds on a bluff working. So, you know, let's take a simple example with a coin flip, right? You're betting. Let's say I bet you $1, and you know, or we each put up $1 on a coin flip, and then clearly, hopefully, we understand at this point that if you flip that coin infinity times, we both end up with $0, right? Because we break even. The way you would think of that is that you're risking one bet to win one bet, meaning you have to win the bet 50% of the time to break even, or 1 out of 2 times. There's 2 possible outcomes, and you have to win one of those 2 possible outcomes. Here, the logic is the same, but the numbers are clearly different. So we're putting up 11 big blinds. There's 5 big blinds in the pot, so we're kind of thinking of the pot as our opponent if we're going to extend like the heads, or excuse me, the coin flip analogy. So if we're risking 11 to win 5, you know, if we're risking 1 to win 1, it would just be, you can see the equation down here. 1 to win 1 would just be 1 divided by 1 plus 1, right? And so here, what confuses people often is that we're betting more than the size of the current pot, as opposed to the other way around, where we would be, say, if we're calling a bet, calculating our pot odds, then clearly there's more than there's extra dead money in there that's greater than the size of the bet, because people typically don't overbet the pot. in flop, turn, or river situations. So here, what we would say is that normally we would say we're getting 2-to-1 pot odds, or we were taking taking 2-to-1 pot odds. Actually, I'm not entirely sure if this is worded correctly, the taking 5 to win 11. But the point is that when you're sort of overbetting, we would normally say that you're laying the pot because you are risking more than you are going to win if you win. And then if you were risking less than you might win, we would say you're taking the odds. So if the sports book will take the odds and lay the odds, and they give different odds for each, which is how they make a profit. So just a little bit, I think that gambling theory is somewhat deficient here on Deuces Crack, just because you guys didn't go through the old 2+2 books like some of us did, which is okay, but we definitely want to sort of understand some general gambling theory, which is why I thought that this slide would be good. So anyway, moving on to the math, you see here, if we're risking 11 to win 5, then we need our play to work 11 out of 11 plus 5 times, or 11 out of 16 times, and so therefore we need 68.75% fold equity, and so clearly that can be rounded, but the idea is that against a guy who's folding that often, you can 3-bet them profitably with any 2 cards. So what this actually shows you is that based on my 3-bet percent, you can probably 3-bet me a lot, and it would be profitable to do so. But the thing is, nobody's actually going to exploit me. And so this leads me to an interesting point that I tend to bring up from time to time, that when you do move up and you see people starting to 3-bet you a bit more often, what you have to realize is that people at the lower let me rephrase. It's not so much that you have become more exploitable. It's more that your opponents are becoming less exploitable. So rather than going all crazy and like starting to 4-bet all over the place or call 3-bets, you probably should just keep folding and not worrying about it. I don't really know how else to say it other than that, but really, people tend to have a tendency to over-adjust, when in reality, the difference between a 3% 3-bet range and a 6% 3-bet range is not that many. It's sort of twice as many hands in a sense, not exactly because of the way the stat is calculated, but it's actually, that still is not enough to really matter most of the time, because your opponents are typically passing on so many profitable 3-betting opportunities as it is, that who cares if you give them a few of them, Poker is a game of trading mistakes, right? So if they're not 3-betting you light enough, just keep folding and let them make that mistake, and then you're going to make a bunch of money. Trust me. So, awesome. A bit of a supersized episode today, but I think this episode was I think it was much more informative and useful than my last one. And hopefully we've gotten back on track of the theme of Road to Robusto. And so what I'm going to try to do for the next video, I'm uncertain whether or not it'll be 25 NL or 50 NL. I think I would probably have to run pretty good to, in fact, let's bring up my overall results here just to sort of show you guys what's been going on. If my mouse would work, God. Okay. So we'll take out these silly little filters. Oh, didn't get them all. Sorry about that. There we go. So you can see I'm up about 240 total. In terms of my overall game plan, what ended up happening was I just got too impatient at 10 NL. So I said at the beginning that I suspected that might happen, which is why I didn't start with just 20 buy-ins there. But I ended up just moving up to 25 NL, and I've played about 4,000 hands there, and I'm up like 216. So I'm gonna, because of coaching and various, transactions that I have to make with my full tilt account, it's been tough to sort of segregate the bankroll from my personal sort of non-Road to Robusto money. So I'm kind of just going to base it off of my winnings, I think. And again, I want to make sure that we get a lot of videos in at or at least some videos in at higher stakes, meaning, at the very least get multiple 50 NL videos, if not get make sure we get 100 NL in there at the end too. So I might have to deviate a bit from my road to Robusto, which I apologize if you were really looking forward to that concept, but I'm going to try my best to just grind it out. And then, as a last resort, if I can't grind it out or if I run bad or whatever, I'll probably end up still, trying to get some higher stakes stuff too, just so that you guys can have it. Because I think that's more important than me, keeping to my theme is making sure I can get the best possible information to you guys. So I will continue to try to do that. And so whoever you are, I really appreciate the feedback that you sent in. You know who you are, and keep it up, because that's how I get better, and that's how we all get better here at Deuces Cracks. So for everyone here, thank you all very much. Hope that I didn't bore you with this slightly supersized episode, and we'll be back to some poker playing next week rather than this Hold'em Manager review. So tune in. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.